Oh, we were talking about, we had talked about social contract theories, yes? Now, we're gonna save that for when our marchers get back to read that and discuss it and so forth, okay? So, we're moving on, and actually, second hour people, we're ahead of fourth hour, which is crazy, right? That never happens, right? So, that's okay, I'll catch them up today. But, we can get a little distracted if we want, so, you know. You got any questions outside or inside of what we're talking about?
Okay, I do actually have one.
Hannah, at first. Okay, so it's kind of funny. So President Biden gave a press conference yesterday. Any of you guys catch that? Any of that? Okay, this is the first press conference he's given in like 100 days.
I was gonna say.
Okay.
That's new.
Yeah, I mean, he never gives these things. Okay, so it was enlightening in many different ways. Okay, so he talked about like the Ukraine, okay, which Kiev right now is shaking in their shoes because the United States is not going to help. Okay, and basically he gave Putin the green light to invade. I mean, what he said was, he's like, well, if it's a minor incursion, we'll have to see what our response would be. That kind of thing. Like, oh no. Okay. All right. So,
is there such a thing as a minor incursion?
well, apparently there is, and I'm getting this on CNN, so this isn't even Fox News. Okay, so you understand, like, when we did the political spectrum yesterday, whenever on the right you have Fox News. Yes, everybody knows that. Does everybody know that? They tilt to the right. And then everybody else pretty much tilts to the left, okay, especially CNN, MSNBC, okay? So CNN, they're interviewing a guy. They got a reporter in Kiev, Ukraine, and he's like, they're shocked by what President Biden said, okay? So they're like, okay, well, we're on our own. Now, that's fair. I mean, because listen, do we want to get in another war? No, but do we want Ukraine to be invaded by Russia? So maybe there's somewhere in between you can, like, you know, puff out your chest and say, Putin, no, you go in there, U.S. will support the Ukrainians, everything short of going to war. Something like that. You know what I mean? Something firm. Okay, so I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay, so Biden said, I received more votes than any candidate in the history of the United States, right? Right? He did. He got more votes than anybody in the history of the United States. So why is he worried about voter suppression? He just won. Okay, now what's happening is during COVID, you had, as an excuse, because people weren't going to want to stand in line next to other people and do 6 feet distancing and all this during the election in November 2020, yes? So they set up all these mail-in ballots. You know, in some states mailed them out to everybody, whether they're registered or not. I mean, they started sending ballots out. And then they had drop boxes where you could just drop your ballot off. And you're supposed to have signature verification, so they match up your driver's license signature with the signature on the ballot that you mail in, type of thing, okay? The security here is lax. Yes? So some states like Georgia put in new laws that said things like you've got to have an ID. You have to show an ID to vote. Wisconsin just got rid of drop boxes. They said, we're not doing that again. Okay, you have to mail it in. You can't just, you know, have all these drop boxes around that are unsecure. And they're shot, you know, on the street. So some states have passed laws trying to make sure that there's not fraud, and they're calling that voter suppression. What the Obama administration really wants to do is federalize the elections so that the U.S. government is in charge of the federal elections, not the states. That's the bill that failed in the Senate yesterday. They're calling it a Voting Rights Act. it's not voting rights, it's voting rules. People have the right to vote. You guys know that, right? There's no voting suppression going on here. Now, is it suppression to force somebody to show an ID? Well, you got to have an ID for what?
Once you turn 16, don't you have to have it?
To register to vote, you don't have to have an ID. You have to have a social security number. Because you can register online. Okay, so what some people say is that there are people in the United States, U.S. citizens, that can't afford an ID. That is suppressing the minority vote. Follow me here? The logic, okay? Now, what does it say about a politician that says black people can't afford or don't know how to get an ID?
He's extremely rich.
I mean, come on now. What are you saying about these people? That they don't know how to get an ID?
There's something like during the election cycle that if you don't vote for me, you aren't black.
Mm-hmm. So, guys, it's shenanigans. Okay, now there's 2 Democrats in the Senate because they want to change the rules of the Senate. Did we talk about filibuster? Okay, I know this is something I saved towards the end of this class, but let's talk about it because it's in the news. All right, so you got in the Senate, you need 60 votes to pass just about anything. Because one senator, one of these 40, can get a hold of the floor in the Senate, like be recognized to speak. Okay, so Senator Jerry Moran from Kansas can be recognized on the floor of the Senate. And he can just talk and hold the floor for as long as he can stand and talk. So while he's talking, you can't vote on a bill. So it's a way to delay or stop a vote from happening. Okay. Now, if you have 2, so Jerry Moran yields the floor to Roger Marshall of Kansas, and Roger Marshall talks for 2 hours, and then he goes. Moran goes and gets something to eat, uses the bathroom, comes back. Moran gets the floor back from Marshall, and he talks for 2 hours, then yields back. So if you have 2 members of the Senate, they can hold up passage on anything to stop something bad from being passed into law. Huh? Well, they just keep doing it. Okay, so now if you have 41 senators that are going to filibuster, do you want a federal takeover of the elections? Do you want the federal government to run the elections, or do you think the states should do that? Because if there's fraud in Chicago, where dead people are voting, that affects your vote in Wichita, Kansas. If Kansas has voter ID, then you know that your vote is counting and somebody else isn't voting illegally in Kansas. But in Chicago, their rules are really lax in Illinois. So if there's fraud in Illinois, it stays in Illinois. It doesn't affect your vote in Kansas. Okay? So the founders of this country said the states will run the federal elections for the federal system, for the president and for members of Congress. Okay? So if you want the government, the federal government, to take over the elections, then you would want the filibuster to go away. Because the Democrats right now have 50 seats. The Republicans have 50 seats, okay? Kamala Harris is the vice president. She's the president of the Senate, yes? Okay. So the Democrats have 51 votes, okay? Republicans have 50 seats, so they can filibuster. They can stop anything from passing. Okay, the $1.3 billion infrastructure bill, you needed 60 votes to pass. Because 60 votes you can do what's called a cloture. That ends a filibuster. So if Ted Cruz votes against the infrastructure bill and he gets a hold of the floor and starts talking, if the Democrats have 60 votes, they can stop it. So basically in the United States Senate, you need 60 votes to pass anything.
The filibuster thing was done on purpose. It's not a design flaw. It's not people saying.
No, they created that rule to make sure that you had consensus, like you had at least some people in both parties. Now in 2009, when Obamacare passed, okay, because not one Republican voted for Obamacare in the House of Representatives or in the Senate. The Democrats had 60 seats in the Senate. The Republicans only had 40. So the Republicans could not stop Obamacare from becoming law. Okay? So the filibuster's been around for almost 200 years in the Senate. Okay? There's a movie, if we have time, I'm going to show you. It's called Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Okay? It was made back in the 30s. It's fabulous. Okay? And it discusses the filibuster. Okay? It's part of the movie. It's really good. Okay? So the Democrats want to do away with the filibuster. They already have when it comes to judges. So when the Supreme Court, how many Supreme Court justices did Trump nominate? 3. Okay, now listen. When the Democrats controlled the Senate, back before Trump was elected, they did what was called the nuclear option. Okay, because Obama was president, right? 2008 to 2016. Okay, Obama. Who gets to appoint federal judges? The president does. So Obama's appointing all these federal judges, right? Well, the Republicans are filibustering. They're like, no, this guy's a communist. This guy's a Marxist. No, this person's not qualified to be a judge. They don't like the way they think, so they filibuster. So the judges don't go on the bench. You with me? So they changed the rules in the Senate back in about 2010 to say for judicial nominations, you only need 51. There's no filibuster. Okay? So when Trump nominated Supreme Court justices, they had changed the rules and the Republicans controlled the Senate.
That backfired for
Oh yeah, it backfires. What goes around comes around, guys. And guys, listen, there was a bill that Ted Cruz put forward last week, a Republican, he's in the minority, okay, that the Democrats filibustered. They just used it, now they want to get rid of it to pass this voting rights legislation to federalize our elections. Thankfully, there's 2 Democratic senators that respect the tradition of the Senate. Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Christian Sinema of Arizona have both said, we're not doing away with the filibuster. You can go back and look at speeches from Joe Biden himself when there were people talking about doing away with the filibuster saying this would be a horrible idea. Chuck Schumer, who is the Senate Majority Leader today, gave an impassioned speech about keeping the filibuster 10 years ago. We have this all on tape. Now they want to do it because they want to control the next election.
my how the term.
They'll stay in power. Right? So it's not happening. Filibuster staying, the Voting Rights Act, it's a Voting Rules Act. Okay. There's no new rights in it. Everybody has the rights. We've had all these Voting Rights Act in the past. You understand? Nobody is being stopped from voting if they're a U.S. citizen. In fact, in New York, they're going to allow 800,000 non-citizens to vote in local elections. Yes, not in federal elections, but in local elections. Because if you're here illegally and your kids go to the schools, then you get to vote for the school board. Because you're affected by that. Because your kids go there. They've done this in California as well. But that's 800,000. Now, how many of those people that registered to vote in local elections will try and vote in the national elections illegally? I don't know. We'll see. Okay, it's up to New York to set its rules for voting. Okay, just like it's up to Kansas. So that's what all this is about. Yeah.
Is there anything that says that if states are really failing at
The federal courts can step in if they see something wrong. Okay, like this, the situation in Georgia, Arizona, and Wisconsin, Michigan. Okay, this is where Trump. So Trump, says they stole the election, right? Didn't Trump say that, right? He's like they stole the election. Okay, and there's a lot of people that believe that in some of these states there were shenanigans. Okay, now remember when Trump won in 2016? I don't know if you're old enough to remember, but Hillary said Trump didn't win legitimately. It was the Russians. The Russians influenced our election, and they talked about that for 3 years. So the last two presidential elections, we've got both sides saying the other side cheated. So, which is worse? Putting some restrictions like voter ID laws in, or having half the country feel like our elections are a sham? If you have, better controls over it, then people have more confidence in it. Not restricting people from voting. We're not going to do that, guys. Now that would get you a lawsuit. You know what I mean? The federal courts would come in and say, no, you're denying U.S. citizens the right to vote. You can't do that. That's protected by the Constitution. So, guys, when Georgia changed its laws, Delaware, Biden's home state, has stricter voting laws than Georgia does. They moved the Major League Baseball All-Star game out of Georgia because people were upset about the new voting law, the ID laws in Georgia. Yes. Ball doesn't lie. Okay. All right, so, the press conference should go back and watch some clips of it and so forth, because you get to see the President of the United States. Okay, this is who our president is. He was asked, is Kamala Harris going to be on the ticket when he runs in 2024? He said, yes, she's going to be on the ticket. Yes, I'm running for re-election. Why? Okay. Well, she's been asked a couple of times, okay? Because Democrats are obviously worried. We don't know what's going to happen with Joe Biden over the next 3 years. So, people are going to ask the question, and so hopefully it puts that to rest. We shouldn't even be talking about this right now anyways. We can, but we shouldn't be. It's 3 years away. It's really 2 years away when they start running. But, yeah, so, he was asked all different kinds of questions. No questions about the border. No questions were asked about the rising crime rates in our cities, which is massive growth in violent crime in our cities. Nobody asked those questions. But there were lots of other questions about inflation and, politics and stuff like that. So I listened to part of it and then watched some clips of it last night as well. So. Yeah. All right. You guys know what filibuster is now. I didn't explain that great. I'll do a better job in my normal flow of things, okay? All right, so this is what we're going to do today. We're taking notes on different forms of government, okay? Different forms of government. That's your header. And then you're going to have a subheader. Geographic distribution of power. So we're looking at different forms of government based on geographic distribution of power. Where the power lies. We've been talking about that just now, really, a little bit. Okay. there's three different kinds here. All right, the first one is called a unitary system. Okay, to define unitary system, centralized government where all the power is in one location. Centralized government where all the power is in one location. Okay. Most countries today use a unitary system. Now, if we do not use a unitary system, but if we did, this would be Washington, D.C. Okay? So Washington, D.C. would be in charge of everything. Now, in Wichita, who is the highest elected city official in Wichita? The mayor. Okay? Now, the mayor, and then you have a city council that the mayor works with, yes? Okay? Now, under a unitary system, the mayor might be elected locally, but he or she would get their directions from the national government. So they would administer government at the local level for the national government. Does that make sense? So the governor that may be elected takes its orders from the national government. Now, we don't use this. So the perfect example is the mask mandates, right? So if we're going to mask up as a community again, that's going to be the county health director at the local level, yes? If we had a unitary system, Joe Biden's vaccine mandate for all businesses that have more than 100 employees would have stood. You understand? Okay, so that's one system, and most countries use this, including Britain. And yesterday, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, everybody know his name? Boris Johnson, guy with the blonde hair that looks like this.
He literally looks like the Trump of Great Britain.
Like who?
Like Trump of Great Britain.
Yeah, he's kind of like Trump of Britain. Now, he's a conservative, but not really. Okay, he's a conservative in Britain is like Bora Kelly, governor, okay, or Mitt Romney, okay.
So moderate.
So anyhow, Boris Johnson announced yesterday, Britain, no more masks, no more vaccine passports. It's over. They're done. Now, why did he do that? Part of his reason because he got in trouble. He was having garden parties at where does he live? Prime Minister lives at 10th Street. Forget the name of the address, but he was having garden parties when they were supposed to be in lockdown, and they were having they were dancing, and there's video of it, and he got busted. Okay. Just like when Nancy Pelosi went to the hair salon, when they had shut down all the hair salons, and then there was video of her going to the hair salon when it was a lockdown. Okay. Rules for thee, but not for me type of thing. Yes? So Boris Johnson said, that's it, we're done. You can wear a mask, but you don't have to. You can get vaccinated, but you don't have to show proof of vaccination for anything. They're done. They can, I mean, sure. Yeah. So that's interesting. This is evolving. Mm-hmm.
So, vaccine doesn't
So I don't know about you guys, but I took a picture of my vaccine card, my phone, and my kids and my wife, and well, my daughter and my wife. My son's unvaccinated. So that if I want to go to Hawaii, I have to show them my vaccine card. That's the passport.
Oh, but like, if they don't require it there, and then they get in the airport, then they go to Hawaii, if they don't have the vaccine.
They can't go to Hawaii. Yeah. So my wife and I are doing a 25th anniversary vacation this summer. We have to be vaccinated, okay? But we're going to Bora Bora.
Oh.
So you guys know the ones with that are out over the water, the huts over the water that you've seen pictures of? We're going big. 25th anniversary. Freaking stuff. It's French Polynesia, okay? Bora Bora, okay? My wife. She's an engineer.
So's my dad. But he doesn't make that much money.
Well, you work for Coke?
He works for us.
She got a bonus this year.
Oh my
Also,
That's where the mess up is.
Which was way more than I make in a year.
Okay.
Like almost double. Now she's a project manager. Now she's got an MBA. She's a chemical engineer. She runs big projects. You know, when you are in charge of a $400 million project and it comes in on time, on budget, and the company makes a lot of money because of that, Coke industry shares that with their employees. They're like, you did a good job. We're going to reward you. That's called merit pay, right? Like if I'm doing a really good job teaching here, shouldn't I make more than a teacher that doesn't do a really good job teaching here? Would you agree with that? Now, how do you judge that? Well, you have to show up and go into people's classrooms and watch them teach. Yes? Do I make more than the other people around here? Maybe I do. And I have a master's. Is that going to bump my pay? I don't know. I'll let you know. Okay. All right. So that's a unitary system. Good. Okay. All right. The next system is a confederal system. Okay. We've heard of this. Confederal. So our first constitution was called the Articles of Federation. This is what we started with. Now, the reason we started with this, guys, is because the people that broke away from Britain after the Declaration of Independence, they're like, we don't trust power. We don't trust government. And we're not going to give the national government a lot of power. We just had that with the king and parliament. We're not doing that again. So when they created this government, they said, we're not going to give any power to this national government, and they gave them very little power. In fact, we will study that, okay? We'll look at the weaknesses, the strengths of the Articles of Confederation, and why we had to do away with it and create a new one, okay? But there's a reason for this. Now, there's a few countries that still use this, okay? Canada is a confederal system. So you guys know up in Canada, they have the provinces, right? Like Quebec. Quebec is, what language do they speak in Quebec? French. Their whole province is French. The others speak English. Oh yeah, it's a thing. It's a big deal, right? So now they have nationalized healthcare in Canada. How did they do that with a very weak national government? The provinces agreed to do it. Okay. So under a confederal system, this body tends to be not have the strength and power of decision making as the states or the provinces or the local governments. Okay, Russia, actually, believe it or not, is a confederal system. Okay, now that system is jacked up. Okay? It's more like a mafia state. Okay, so okay, do I need to define this? Let me define this for you if I have a definition. Okay, yeah. An alliance of independent states. Here's another example of a confederal system. The European Union. The EU. Okay? Now, they have a centralized European Union government. Okay? But the states, the countries of Europe that are in it still retain some autonomy. You know what I mean? They can kind of do their own thing to an extent. Now, Britain left the European Union a couple of years ago. I don't know if you remember that, called Brexit. Okay? That was a big deal. Okay? And that passed like 51 to 49% in Britain. They said, we're getting out of here. Because this small group of people at this European Union were trying to dictate what Britain did. And they're like, we didn't elect you. We're leaving. And they never adopted the euro. The British kept the pound because the pound was more valuable than the euro. The euro was great for countries like Greece, okay, that are very poor. Yeah. Ireland, it was good for them, okay, but not for Britain. And so they, God bless them. And they said, you're not going to make these decisions for us. This would be like the United Nations making decisions for us. I didn't elect these people. They don't have a say over us. Okay? All right. So you got that? Good, right? Confederal. And then the last one, guys, is what we use. It's called a federal system. Okay, so let me give you a definition, and I demand that you memorize it. Okay? The sharing or division of power, the sharing or division of power between national, state, and local governments. The sharing or division of power between national, state, and local governments. Federalism. It's a beautiful thing. Now, it is also a thing that has led to great conflict in our nation. Most of the arguments we have in this country deal with federalism. In fact, the biggest argument we ever had in this country, called the Civil War, was fought over federalism. Southern states that had the institution of slavery wanted to continue that institution. The northern states, which there were more of them, and they had more people, and so they had more people in Congress. And then we elected Abraham Lincoln, and he said, we're going to do away with this institution. And the South said, no, we're not. And they said, yes, we are. And they said, well, fine, then we're going to leave. They said, you can't leave. You got to have permission to leave, and we're not giving you permission. And they said, well, too bad. We're leaving anyways. What was it? What were they fighting about? Yes, slavery is the overarching issue here, but it is a question of federalism, where these states have the right to do this or not. Okay? And since we're talking about human beings, not property, we're talking about people, this could no longer stand. We had to get rid of it. Okay? So, when Governor Kelly shut down our schools, whole state of Kansas, she had that power to do that. Today, she doesn't, because the legislature took that away from her afterwards. So now, if we're shutting down a school, that decision is made here. Because what's going on in 259 might not be going on in 266. Now, guys, my religious people here, subsidiarity of the church. You heard of this? If there's a problem in the Wichita diocese, do we call the Pope? We don't call the Pope. And if there's a problem in Wichita, Kansas, we don't call the president. We got people here to deal with that. In fact, Biden came out a couple weeks ago and said, he was talking to the governors. He said, look, this is a state problem. States need to learn to deal with COVID. This is not going to be solved by the federal government. Well, hallelujah. That's right. Just like education. Now, guys, certain powers in our Constitution are granted to the national government. Like here, only the national government can coin money. Kansas can't print its own money. It says both. It says only the national government, and it says states cannot. Kansas cannot declare war on Canada. Only the U.S. Congress can declare war. You follow me? So these rules are all laid out. Now, nowhere in this document does the word education appear anywhere. So if it's not a power given to the national government, it's reserved to the states or local government, to the people. That's in the 10th Amendment. They just reaffirmed federalism with the 10th Amendment. So, tell me, in 1976, why did the United States government create the U.S. Department of Education? Because we survived for 200 years as a nation without a U.S. Department of Education. They don't have the power to dictate education policy in Washington, but they did it anyways. Do the people of Kansas, I know we're a bunch of hayseeds and hicks out here, okay? Do we not know how to educate our children? Do we need some Ivy Leaguer that works in Washington, D.C. to tell us how to educate our children? Apparently we do. Because we can't do it ourselves. Now, I went to school in several states. I went to elementary school in Indiana. I went to middle and part of high school. In Illinois, I went to elementary school. Indiana, I went to middle and part of high school. And then my last year and a half of high school was in Florida. Was there a difference in the education of those three states? Yes. In fact, you can go from Wichita South High and drive 10 miles in that direction and go to Andover. Is there a difference in the educational system? Yes. Okay. So it's a local thing. That's USD. It's Unified School District. That's a government. That's a local government. Okay. The federal government does dictate some education policy, mostly when it comes to things like special ed. Okay. So a lot of the funding for special ed programs comes from the federal government. Okay. Now, what the states get with that money is a bunch of paperwork, a lot of bureaucracy. Okay. So there's if you want to talk about shrinking the size of the U.S. government, like we have $30 trillion in debt, right? And you can do one or two things. You can raise more revenue, which, by the way, guys, this year, we paid, U.S. citizens paid $4 trillion in taxes, which is the most taxes ever collected in the history of the United States. But we spent $7 trillion. So you got to do one or two things if you're going to balance a budget, right? You've got to either bring in more money or spend less, or a combination, yes? So if we want to cut the size of government, cut spending, where do you start? Because anytime you cut spending, you're going to cause pain. And politicians don't like to cause pain. That's right. I start with the U.S. Department of Education. Just get rid of it. Get rid of it. Now, you can continue to fund programs, but you don't have to have all those employees that all have pensions, that all make good salaries. It's a lot of money. While we're at it, let's get rid of the U.S. Department of Energy. We don't need it. They don't make energy. Oil companies make energy. Siemens builds the windmills. They make the energy. Government doesn't do that. It just sets policy, and so you need a bunch of people to work for the U.S. Department of Education to set policy or of energy. Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna ask.
It's a good question. Can we do it on our own? Did we do it on our own for centuries? You see what I'm saying? Anytime there's a problem, they say, well, let's create an agency. Then these agencies never go away, because that will cause people to lose their jobs and cause pain. And members of Congress don't want to do that.
What about that one agency that's like the Hoover Dam thing? It's only got
TVA?
The TVA.
Yeah, still around. Well, they manage those. I mean, the TVA has some relevance. I mean, somebody's got to make sure the dams are safe and, running correctly. But education, that's my big one, because it's not a role that's given to the national. You know what I mean? States can do this. Local people can do this. Okay? You got to find somewhere to cut, guys, and it's not going to be Social Security or Medicare, which chew up about 55% of the entire budget. Then you got the military, which is another 20%. So you're really dealing with a small piece of pie when it comes to spending that you can cut. All right, that was fun. You guys have a good day.